Now I have the honor of actually introducing our keynote speaker. And there are many, many things I could say and read about him, his incredible accomplishments. Anyone who has a cell phone, which is 100% of the people in this room, knows that when they first came out, that this was going to change communication and other things. But Omar was one of the first people in the world to really think beyond that as an entrepreneur, to think that this is going to be an amazing facility to push mobile advertising and marketing. So at a young age, he built a company. He's the founder and CEO of AdMob, which is a huge company and was one of the first and largest companies to do this in the entire world. And being recognized as such, it was quickly chased after by Google and other companies, and eventually he sold to Google, and that was the beginning of many other things that he's accomplished. And among that, he is currently a partner at Sequoia Capital and has the opportunity to see other major startups in the world. And so not only as an entrepreneur, but himself and his wife, Umayma, have been incredible philanthropists and supporters of New Horizon and other activities throughout the world. And in fact, we're proud to say that their gift is what really got us to this point where we're looking at this upper campus as a reality, inshallah, in about 1.5 years. They gave $9 million matching grants, which encouraged us, the board, the school, to try to get another 9 million. So their 9 million became 18 million, which became the major part of this project. So alhamdulillah, we have their support, and we have so much support of so many of you around here as well that's gotten us to this point. And inshallah, we're going to make this a reality. But as he makes his way up to the podium, again, we're keeping this short and sweet. Among all his accomplishments, there's one that's probably the biggest. And as I welcome here onto the stage, his biggest accomplishment is he's also an incredibly humble man, and he's become one of my best friends. And here, Omar Hamoui, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Barak, and thank all of you for having me here, the board and the school. Umayma and I and my whole family are really excited to be here with you all tonight. I actually didn't realize how appropriate this backdrop would be. So in my speech while I was writing it, I talk about cars and I talk about racing and a whole bunch of stuff, and now this is like pretty awesome. So I have the cars here. I'm going to say I had it all planned, although I'm not sure I did. So it's going to be a bit of an unconventional talk. I'm not going to try and sort of do an inspirational speech or sort of leave you here with kind of floaty ideas. I really want to be kind of specific and actually walk you through a thought process I've been having. And it's kind of a multi-step thought process, so just stay with me here. And I just want to take you through what I've been thinking about and some of the ways in which I think we can actually continue to make even more of a difference than we already are. And it started with kind of this feeling, and I think it's probably a feeling that many of us have, that something's just not quite right with what's going on with Islam. And that might be like a nice way of saying it, but it certainly feels like there's something a little wrong, and it's just something, or something a lot wrong. It's something in your, in your gut. And so that, that was really the start of the process, which is, for me, it was, let me see the button here. No. Which one? This other one? Talking about wrong things. Let's see. There we go. So what's the problem? And what occurred to me is that what I believe, and what many of us believe deep in our core, which is that we have something to give, that our faith has something useful and productive and positive for the world, isn't really being matched by the evidence that we continue to see on a daily basis, right? So you get this inbound evidence which contradicts a really deep belief that you have. And there's actually a term for this, and the term is called cognitive dissonance. And the person who coined the term is a guy named Frantz Fanon. And this is how he described it. He said, sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they're presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It would create a feeling that's extremely uncomfortable, called cognitive dissonance. And because it's so important to protect that core belief, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit with the core belief. So that's one way of dealing with this dissonance. So one way is you get evidence and you ignore it because it doesn't fit and it doesn't make you happy. It's very uncomfortable. There's another way, though. The other way is not to ignore evidence. The other way is to believe other evidence that's not even real. It's to believe things that aren't true just because they feel better, right? So both of those things can kind of satisfy this feeling you have in the pit of your stomach. And the problem is that both of those they're examples of kind of sloppy thinking. And the other thing is, Barack was saying I sit on the boards of lots of companies and we always talk about competition, and sloppy thinking is just not a good way to compete. And so that actually got me thinking about competition. Because a fair bit of, I think, the feeling is also about competition, because competition's a really critical part of life. It's critical at the cellular level, it's critical at the biological level, and it's certainly critical at the societal level. It's something that happens all around us, and it's not just related to businesses and biology. Because when I got to that part, and I told you this is about a thought process, I started thinking, I remember there was an ayah in the Quran about competition. And it was kind of vague, right? So I wanted to look it up. But I remembered something about istabiqul khairat. There's compete for goodness. And I think the idea was you were supposed to compete with your fellow Muslims to see who could be better. And I wanted to look that up so that I could sort of relate it to what we were doing, what I was thinking about. And many of you probably sort of think, there's actually two ayahs in the Quran, both have the words istabiqul khairat, and it turned out neither of them was about competing with Muslims. So I was surprised, because that's what I thought they were about. So let me show you these. Because Allah says in the Quran, He says, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَمُهَيْمِنًا عَلَيْهِ فاحكم بينهما بما أنزل الله ولا تتبع أهواءهم عما جاءك من الحق لكل جعلنا منكم شرعة ومنهاجا ولو شاء الله لجعلكم أمة واحدة ولكن ليبلوكم في ما آتاكم فاستبقوا الخيرات إلى الله مرجعكم جميعا فينبئكم بما كنتم فيه تختلفون. So now you guys can read the translation yourself, but there's a few key parts of this, right? First of all, he's saying, to start, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we revealed to you a book confirming and protecting and guarding over what was revealed before. So there are things that came before, we revealed to you something that confirms, protects, and guards over it. Judge then in affairs of men in accordance with the law that Allah has revealed, and do not follow their desires if it goes against what Allah reveals. So you can't be like them. You can't do what they're doing. Even though this is confirming and essentially superseding what was revealed. So you can't be like them. But for each of you, we have appointed a law and a way of life. For each of you. And if we wanted, you'd be one. You're not one, so the goal isn't one. Because if the goal was one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have just made us one. That wasn't the goal. What is the goal? Why? So why? Why aren't we one? He gave each of you a law and a way of life in order to test you by what He gave you. Compete then with one another until Allah is the return of all of you, and then He will make you understand concerning the matters on which you disagreed. So now this is different, because with my previous understanding, it was compete with other Muslims, meaning first, to get to the game, you have to be Muslim. Then you compete. And then whoever does the best good, Allah will judge between them. That's not what this says at all. This says all of us, right? All of us, all of the communities around us, all the faith communities that we interact with, we're all on the field. And we're all in the game. And all the good that they're doing matters. And it's competitive to what we're doing. And it's not, and I don't see this, and I use the word game specifically because I think it's the best analogy for this kind of competition. It's not hostile, right? It's respectful. It's understanding that what they're doing matters and that what we're doing has to relate to what they're doing. But it's not looking at it and being hostile or angry. It's actually looking at it and understanding that this is something that can be congenial, in fact. But still, it is a competition. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying they're on the field, it counts. And it's important because it made me thinking, well, why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want us to compete? It's because competition is good, it makes you better. But it makes you better, first of all, you have to acknowledge you're in a competition. Second of all, you actually have to respect your competition. Third, you have to understand where you relate to them. Are you behind them? Are you in front of them? Are you neck and neck? Where do you sit relative to what else is going on? And lastly, you actually have to actively work hard, train, practice, develop yourself. Think about what you could improve to actually compete. All of these things are important if a competition is going to benefit you. And so, if it's a game, and if it's a competition, then what is this khairat? What is the game? And the game is the game of life, right? The game it's a way of life game. And the goal of the game is to use your rules, interactions, customs, and character traits and good things to make people's lives better. And not just better in the spiritual sense, but better in terms of their family, their productivity, their creativeness, their happiness, their contribution to the world. And the winners of this game don't just get better lives for themselves, they actually make the world a better place. And for a long time, historically, we were winning, right? The golden age of Islam wasn't by either miracle or violence, it was because we had a better way of life. And people knew it, and they came to us, they flocked to us, right? Andalus is not a story of conquest, it's a story of enlightenment, and everyone understanding that. And people will also abandon things that aren't working. No, a way of life doesn't have a right to exist. You don't just get to be here because you're here. There's no rule that says people are going to follow it forever. The rule is that if it's not useful, if it's harmful, if it's hurtful, if it's degrading people and diminishing them, they're going to leave it. They may pay it lip service, but you actually have to have a competitive system if you want people to really follow it. And all of us here are a prime example of that. All of us here either came here or are born to people who came here because they realized that in terms of a system, there were distinct advantages to being here. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that fact and to understand that these things, in terms of trying to ease the cognitive dissonance, that's something we actually have to think about. And so that brought me to the next part, which is fine. So this feeling is related to this cognitive dissonance and the fact that probably things aren't going so well in this competition we're in. So what is it that we do? What are we supposed to do about that? Because if we're supposed to be solving the problem, and we're supposed to sort of make the evidence we see relate to the feeling we have on the inside, then we have to create some evidence that actually corresponds to what we feel on the inside. So if we are good and useful and productive people that make the world a better place, we have to actually do things that make the world a better place. And I know many of us in this room are already involved in projects that do this. So I am certainly not trying to be here and lecture, I think, all of us here who are already involved in these projects and say we're not doing anything. We certainly are. But it really is about the broader community, not only taking the actions, and I sort of listed here a number of technologies, like things that matter, right? Because it's not just things that matter to Muslims. It's not just even, our community centers and schools and masajid, but it's all these technologies. It's movies, it's podcasts, it's youth centers, it's homeless shelters. Like for every, hospital the Baptists have, we have to have a clinic, right? For every homeless shelter the Catholics have, we have to have a soup kitchen. We have to have the things because we're competing. Because and we're not competing in a bad way, we're competing for goodness. And so building these things is really critical. Part of what we're doing today is critical, but building them in general is really critical, and that will help us ease this dissonance that I'm speaking about. And so, great, we need to build things, and we need to build competitive things. That's how far I got, and then I started thinking a little bit about what does that mean? Like how I know we're building things, right? I know many of the people in this room are actually working on, projects that help the world or are productive and useful. So what is it that's not quite sitting right? And I think it's the competitive things, because again, for the example, these are competitive things, right? Sitting around me. People built these, and they're complicated. And the issue is that when we're building competitive things now, we are building them as small groups or individuals. And the era of individual competition is over. Like, you can't do this stuff by yourself. You can't build one of these by yourself. If you want to do that, and you don't need a group, you need a system, right? You need a factory. You need something that's capable of actually churning out on a long-term basis these types of projects and supporting them and innovating and reinventing them and iterating and making a mistake and coming back and trying again. You need a whole big system, because you cannot build competitive things as a small group or as an individual person. And since we're talking about building things, I want to talk to you a little bit about my own experience of building things. So Barak talked about a company that I worked on, that I founded, called AdMob. Many of you know the story, some of you may not. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I just want to talk about the experience of it, because that was my 5th company. The first 4 companies I built, and AdMob was in the Bay Area, the first 4 companies I built were here in Southern California. They were bootstrapped. They were essentially myself and a group of friends. They were, I want to say, funded by friends and family, but my father painfully remembers exactly who they were funded by, I'm sure. And so, small efforts with limited support as much as possible, and they didn't work. But for my 5th company, the 5th company, which was AdMob, I ended up going to the Bay Area, and that's what I was referring to. So that's what I was trying to do, right? I was trying to build a car by myself, and this is what a car by yourself looks like. And so for my 5th company, which was AdMob, I ended up going to the Bay Area. And there, the company was invested by a long-term investor called Sequoia Capital, and then another one called Excel. Later on, I was able to meet tons of people who'd done this before, hire really experienced people. It attracted the attention of Apple, and later, because Apple was interested, it got acquired by Google. All of this, though, is part of the reason you're in the Bay Area is because of the ecosystem. It's a system, it's a factory, and all of these groups actually play a role in it. They talk to each other, they interact with each other. Sequoia knew people at Google, Excel knew people at Apple. Everybody knows everybody, and it's actually all related and connected. And even now, I've joined this firm called Sequoia. We're investors. We really want our companies to, like, if somebody wants an investment and they're in Chicago, we frequently want to invest, and it's not because good companies can't be built in Chicago. It's because we don't know the ecosystem there, and the ecosystem hasn't been built to build great companies. We'll actually say, no, you should move to the Bay Area. That's how important it is. Like, that's how it's done in these companies. It's critical that you be in the factory. Because if you're not in the factory, or if you don't have a factory, you can't build these types of projects. You can't build competitive things. And I'm not just talking about getting a group of like-minded people together, or just like, let's put a board together, or let's all collaborate. It's not that. It's actually more than that. It's more than just grabbing 5, 10, or 20 people and putting them in a room. And so then, fine, the next thought is then we need an ecosystem. So where are we? Where is our ecosystem? And where are others? And to think about that, I actually wanted to think about how would I define an ecosystem, right? How would I think about the stages? And so here's what I came up with. I think there are probably 5 stages that I could come up with. The first is a single operator or a small partnership. The second, community money, local talent. The third is where you have a long-term investor and experienced operators. And experienced operators, what I mean is people who've done it before, or people who have a long-term history of doing whatever it is they're trying to do. The fourth, long-term investors, experienced operators, and big winners. Big winners in my previous example, Apple and Google, right? The long-term investors were Sequoia and Excel. Experienced operators were me, but only after because I failed 4 times. Then the fifth one is long-term investors, experienced operators, supporting entities, meaning like supporting organizations, business groups, whatever you want to have. And then you have the big winners, and you also have a halo effect. The halo effect is that people hear about it. They want to be a part of it. They actually come to it, right? So Silicon Valley has this. Hollywood has this. Hollywood's another ecosystem. Can't make movies really very well outside of Hollywood. So these are the stages. So then I looked at it and I said, fine, where are we? And I think we're at stage 2. I think we're at stage 2 where most of our projects are based on community money and the talent that we can find. And the issue is that anything before stage 3 gives you tactical one-off projects. It lets you do something for as long as you can do it. You raise the money every year, and you kind of go on the treadmill, and then when you lose certain people or people lose interest, it goes away. And one thing it's missing is this long-term investor issue, which we'll come back to. But the long-term investor is critical because it represents something. It represents a group or entity that has a strategic interest over the long haul. They don't go away by project. They don't disappear. They think carefully, and they invest in one thing, but not only do that, they learn from it, right? So they learn the mistakes that they made at a previous project. So let's say we start a clinic, and there's an entity that's supporting the clinic, and the clinic goes, and it rises, and then there's another clinic somewhere else in the country, or not even a clinic. There's a school elsewhere that wants to start, and they can say, well, we actually worked with this law firm. They did a wonderful job. We tried to use these people to do the taxes. They were terrible. We actually know the mayor of that town. We can help you. Like, they have actually a long-term, consistent view that's actually productive over the long haul. Otherwise, we have to relearn these things every project, every time. And we have to remake the mistakes. And it's very hard to make progress. And so fine, this is a theory. This is my theory. And in my business, we have, you can look at things what we call top-down. You can also look bottom-up. So this is a top-down analysis. This is saying, here's what I think the system is, and here's where I theorize it is. But I wanted to get some evidence, some tangible evidence, because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're at step 3, maybe we're at step 4, maybe we have competitive projects. And so I actually went and I looked at 2 of the projects we're doing. And I met some of a brother and a sister from some of these projects in here today. And don't get me wrong, I believe they're wonderful, important, and critical, right? And they're projects that we're doing that are on a national scale. So this is kind of like what's very important to us and what we're putting all of our energy into. So it should be sort of best in class, in my opinion, and it's useful to compare. So I looked at MPAC and CARE, which I think are very important, critical organizations. And I believe these numbers are accurate, but I tried to get their annual budgets. MPAC's annual budget, $1.7 million. CARE's is around 3. These are critical organizations to Muslims on a nationwide scale. Not only that, I actually encourage all of you to support them and think about what they're doing. But if you remember what I said at the beginning, I said it's competitive. So I wanted to look at other faith-based groups that compete at a national scale. So I looked at another one, similar size, slightly larger than us. I looked at people from the Jewish faith and similar organizations that they have. So that's APAC, and that's the ADL. So APAC has a $70 million annual budget, and the ADL has a $50 million annual budget. So that's the competition. And just to sort of underline the fact, and what I'm talking about, the ecosystem and the long-term investor, I looked further. Each of these are supported by endowments. An endowment is a large pool of money that people take and they invest over the long term, and they don't spend it every year. They save it, they invest it, and they use a small portion of it to support. So that is the APAC endowment, $120 million. The ADL endowment, about $150 million. So that's the competition of one competitor. You also have numerous Christian denominations. Many of them have endowments larger than $10 billion. The Mormon Church, I put larger than 10, it's about $30 billion. There's only 6 million Mormons in the US. The Jewish Federations of North America, so they have federations, people of the Jewish faith, they have federations in each city, and that rolls up to one large federation called the Jewish Federation of North America, $400 million. The Jewish Federation of LA, one city is 100 million. Most major cities have a federation of that size in every city. All these are endowments. The closest thing I could find that we have is an organization called NATE, the North American Islamic Trust, and it's intended to hold deeds of masajid. It can't really invest in them, they're not growing, it can't spend them, it can't do projects. So I put it up there to be nice, but it's not really on the same scale. So that's the state. That's the state of the union, which is, okay, that's not good. That's an ouch, right? Because that's not quite where we need to be to build the competitive projects we actually need to build. And so that led to more thinking, which is, what do we do about this? How do we actually get to that stage where we can actually get something done here? Sorry, I'm having paper issues. And so the first thing I started to think about was, how do we solve this long-term investor issue? Because that's obviously a pretty critical one. That is the one that we are most behind in, where I couldn't even find a real example of one happening. And I being an entrepreneur, I don't like to make problems seem immense. And so I try to just simplify it. I try to say, look, there are, amongst all of us, you can think about it in a variety of ways. It doesn't need to be wealthy families. It can be people, people who can contribute even less. But let's just assume the very wealthiest families we have. Let's say we find 10 of them, right? We find 10 extremely wealthy families. We get them to agree to donate $1.5 million a year each. And we give ourselves a little time. That gives you something that looks like this, right? It gives you investment at normal growth, where you end up in year 12 at about $320 million. Year 5 years, we have a $100 million endowment. And I'm just being clear, we don't have this. Like in 5 years, you could have the largest Muslim-focused endowment, and I don't even want to say Muslim-focused, good-focused with a hint of Muslim, right? So focused on good, that actually, but it comes from us, that reaches $100 million. We don't have, that would be the largest in the US, period. By year 12, 320, and by year 22, you have a $1 billion endowment. And that's now you're talking about something that's at the stage of our competitors, right? And it's not impossible. It's frankly quite doable. And the time, again, seems daunting, but New Horizon, I believe, started 2001, right? 16 years ago. So 16 years passes anyways. It's gonna happen. Something seems like we should get started on. And what else do you get from a long-term investor? You get that connectivity, you get the shared learnings, you get the strategic mindset, and you get this entity that can actually connect all the projects under a roof that starts to make sense, again, where there is a long-term view towards what we're doing. Great. So we can do that over time. And I think, for me, I'm talking to you guys about this because it's sort of a preview of something I've been thinking about, not necessarily something we're going to be active with today or that we're working on right now, but it's something that we need to get started with. And so what we can do right now, obviously, is focus on this. And there's a reason for this. I mean, this comes to, this New Horizon itself comes to the reason I'm standing here today. Because Umayma and I have been, as Brock said, we've donated $9 million to this project. It will be, inshallah, a total of, I believe, north of $23, $24 million project to build, including its own endowment, right? To build a community center and school that's going to support this community, but more importantly, to me, certainly we support the school, but more importantly to us, the team here is obviously experienced operators, and we get into the big winners category, right? This doesn't exist in this country. We don't have one of these. If we had 5 or 10 or 20 of them all over the country, it actually would be less interesting to our family. It's interesting because it puts us in that big winner category. And it sets us up to get a little bit of a halo effect and a little bit of attention. And when we go around, inshallah, talking to some wealthy families saying, these are the kinds of projects that a very large endowment, like the one I was talking about previously, can support. And so it kind of gets the flywheel going on getting us to this step 4. And most importantly, it sort of gets us on a competitive field, right? It puts us in a situation where we know, our children know, the people around us know, that we're not here just to watch, that we're here to compete, and that we have our heads in the game. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Oh, one more.